Bienvenido and welcome to the Botanical Gardens here in Medellín, Colombia. My name is Andrew White. I'm the Vice President of the Association of Colombian Science Journalists and Communicators. I'm joined here today to give a quick wrap-up of the morning by Vera Novaes and Lynn Walker. We're going to talk a little bit about their sessions. So maybe, guys, you can start off with a quick description of the title of your session, your workshop, and a bit about what people might have missed this morning.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. We're excited to be here in Medellín at the Jardín Botánico. We are Inquire First, and we are working with journalists on a project that we actually launched in 2019 at the World Conference of Journalists called Historias Sin Fronteras, Stories Without Borders. And our workshop today is called Crossing Borders, Strengthening Science Journalism in Latin America. We started this, as I mentioned, 4 years ago at the previous World Conference. And since then, we have been building this program to incorporate more and more Latin American journalists and to work together in a collaborative way across borders. We believe that by working across borders and working together, we can strengthen science journalism. And so far, it has really worked for us and for the journalists in Latin America, most importantly.
Great. So one question that I had, Lynn, was, what has been the sort of vibe in the room? These are journalists from all across the continent. I assume most of them haven't met before, and they're coming together in teams to come up with stories. Like what's ahead for them in the afternoon in terms of pitching?
Well, that's right. First, let me mention that we have journalists from 15 countries here, as well as Puerto Rico. So that is really, really a great representation of Latin America. We've had a great vibe this morning because we're already getting journalists ready, and right now they're outside working on projects. These are journalists who've never met each other before. They have to be from different countries, and they're working to work on these teams, and they're going to come up with a project idea. They're going to pitch it this afternoon. They've got 5 minutes in a lightning round pitch session, and before the end of the World Conference, we'll be awarding a grant to the winning team for a project that crosses borders on a subject of importance in Latin America.
Fantastic. And I understand that, like you mentioned, this happened in the Sound 4 years ago. Can you briefly run us through some of those projects? What came out, and what might we be able to expect from these guys today?
Well, that's right. We did our pilot project in Lausanne. It was the first time we'd ever attempted anything like this. At the time, it was a wild idea. That was in 2019. The first project, the one that we awarded a grant to during that World Conference, was a finalist for an International Journalism Prize. So that gives you an idea of the quality of the work that's being produced by journalists in Latin America. Since then, we have published, I believe 9 more projects. And we have been able to publish those projects in 40 media organizations stretching from Canada to Argentina. And that tells you, again, the quality of the work. These editors at the media organizations are not friends of mine. They are simply doing it based on the quality and the value of the work that the journalists are producing.
So just final question. Last time, this was Latin Americans who had traveled to Switzerland, and they were sitting there at this fancy university. What do you think it means to the participants to be here at the Botanic Gardens here in Medellín, Colombia, in the heart of Latin America?
Well, I think it's super exciting for everybody to be in their own region and to be with colleagues from their own region and to have this opportunity to really exchange ideas, professional ideas, professional experience. I think it's quite different, and it means a lot. We're doing this workshop in Spanish, by the way, and I just can sense the energy in the room. And we're looking forward to a great afternoon of hearing some terrific pitches for stories.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so Vera, let's talk about the other session that was happening today. This was about journalism ethics. So can you tell us a bit about the work of Luisa Masrani and how this session evolved? Because we also had some interventions from the audience and from you as well.
Thank you, Andrew, and hello, everyone. I'm Vera Novaes from Portugal. I'm the president of the Portuguese Network of Science, Communication and Technology, and I was here to moderate the session that you were saying. Luisa Massarani from Brazil was presenting on science journalism in Latin America and the Caribbean, the perspective of science journalists, and also to introduce a second part of the guiding principles for science journalism, the first part of the roundtable. So the work of Luisa was presenting was part of inquiry made amongst the members, the science journalists, or people that identify themselves as science journalists here in Latin America, and that was immediately a topic to discussion. Who are the science journalists and what means to be a science journalist? And here for this survey, like Luisa explained, people who consider themselves as science journalists were invited to participate. So this might mean they are exclusively science journalists or working full-time as science journalists, or are also doing some other science writer stuff. But that is also disclosed if they are PRs and so on. So this was one of the questions raised. And the report is available, so I won't be discussing in detail the report, but I will just point here some topics that I found interesting. Is that they understood the difference, or they could check the difference between what in the answers between what people believe it's the right thing to do and what people were actually doing on their daily practice. So this is really interesting.
And which one of were there some surprises there that people might say, yes, this is always very important, and then they didn't end up doing it in reality?
They questioned specifically on the pandemic and on the climate change, and they also pictured the stuff like, should we provide papers or articles to read to our sources or not? This was some of and one of the results they had that I found it really interesting on what is the mission of science journalists, and only 9% of the audience said to be a public watchdog, and 16% consider a science journalist should be promoting science. So these two numbers, I think it will give us floor to a great discussion on what is to follow, that is the guideline principles on ethics, and what are the boundaries that between science journalism and science communication, and who is science journalist, or stepping a bit further from there.
And so sort of following on from that, we had some contributions from the audience, particularly, I think there was a journalist from Kenya. Were there regional differences or language differences? For example, I know here in Colombia that someone who works for a university might be called a science journalist, although in Australia, someone who works for a university would never be called a journalist, and that would be either a cultural or a language difference. So what, for you, and hearing the feedback from the audience, were some of those regional differences?
I think language is an issue, meaning that the way you express yourself in English, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in French, or in any other language will be different. Luisa gave also an example from her work, what is paid content, meaning for in English, in Portuguese, or for Spanish-speaking countries, it's different. And this might be an issue. Who are the science writers, right? Science communicators, science journalism. It will be hard to define, and it will be different from country to country. But Luisa didn't want to go too further into this, because on Wednesday she will be presenting a similar report, but made all over the world with the other science journalists. This was specifically for Latin America. What the fellow from Kenya brought to the table was something also very important: mentoring for science journalists, and I would say also mentoring for journalists that are writing about science from time to time in news media. Writing, I'm a writer, so I always say writing, but it can be on TV or radio. And the pandemic shown us that you can have every journalist covering science in times like this. So to avoid mistakes, people should have some basic training on science, some basic knowledge on science. Also to know where to look for, or who are the people that you should contact, how to be suspicious or question some of their certainties. It will be easier if they have some mentoring.
So I guess the final question before we wrap up here at the Jardín Botánico here in Medellín at the World Conference of Science Journalists is to look at, we have so many challenges as science journalists. Why is it that ethics is a really important thing to talk about? Why open this space to talk about ethics when we're just trying to put bread on the table most of the days?
You know, because ethics, I believe, now it's only my opinion here, but I believe ethics will be the base to everything. If you solve your ethics, don't solve, but if you have at least some guiding principles on ethics, you will be able to manage all the other questions, or at least try to address other questions that journalists face. And like you're saying, put bread on the table. If you have some guiding principles on ethics, maybe you will be able to pick the better bread for your table. Just let me add something on this guiding principles, because this work started already in 2019 in Hungary, and we had other sessions in 2020. And then the pandemic came and we were away. Now we are together again, and with you watching us from that side. And we have come together to collect some opinions of people. And now we are launching also a survey that will also, it is also meant for people from members from the Federation to give their opinion on these ethical issues that we will be discussing this week. And in the end of the week, we hope we will get a document that will be as close as possible to a consensus, or at least something that people would feel comfortable about sharing and following, or it will be a work in progress, of course.
Okay, fantastic. I think that just about does it for us here at the 12th World Conference of Science Journalists. This is only the first morning. We're going to have 3 whole days after this of amazing sessions, some of them underneath the amazing Orchiderama here at the Botanic Garden. So I want to thank all of you watching for getting a preview of what's been happening here. I also want to thank Vera and Lynn for joining us, and please stay tuned with more updates from the World Conference of Science Journalists.